Well, I'm Cynthia DeLorenzi. I am the CEO and founder of Success in the City, which is a surprise to me because when I moved to Washington, D.C., I was just looking for a few girlfriends, and I ended up developing a relationship with amazing business leaders, not only here but around the world. And I'm excited to be here today. I have a big announcement. Many of you may or may not know it, but I moved to Las Cruces, New Mexico 2 months ago. I wasn't planning to move there. In fact, my husband buys everything on the internet, and he bought a house on the internet. So, so be careful what you might do. The internet makes everything possible. But I'm really excited to be here today to have this conversation with Peter Buffett. But I'd like to start by expressing our gratitude to Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, who's been our supporter of this series of interviews and conversations for more than 6 years. And we've discovered a lot on the journey. We've met amazing people. And today to have this conversation with Peter is so absolutely amazing. I can't believe it's here. And it started because his people reached out to us and said, we're going to be in town. Would you share it with your followers? I said, I certainly will. When can I interview you? So always be prepared to look for the opportunity. So if you have ever had the opportunity, as you've discovered already through our wonderful introduction, Peter is a musician, and he does an amazing program unlike anything you've ever seen. My husband, who is forced to attend many events with me, grumbles and complains, and when I took him to this event, he attended, he said, that's the best thing you ever took me to. So that is high praise.
There you go.
So you have music, you have conversation, you learn and discover things not only about other people's lives, but yourselves and the impact you can have on the earth. So that's a great way to start. So we are going to be discussing today Peter's incredible book, Life is What You Make It. And all of those here today, we have a gift for you. You can have the book, and Peter will sign it. So we're going to be very tight on time because he's going to leave here and he has other things to do. I don't understand it for some reason. He's like in demand, but okay. And just so you know, we have a new publisher in town for Her Life magazine. We're my girls, okay, Nancy and Patricia. Because I'm a ham, I wanted to make sure you had my cover. So, but for those of you who have amazing businesses, you may want to meet with them and make sure you have an opportunity to either share your story or be featured in their magazine or advertise. So I encourage you to do that. So let's get started, Peter. So I know your father is Warren Buffett. I don't know, have anybody ever heard of Warren Buffett? Okay. Well, he's kind of had a pretty big influence on our world. So, but we know your father probably is fairly well off. So when you're raised in that way, I imagine you're raised in incredible mansions, that you never had to drive a car, you've always had limos, and that you went to school in Switzerland. Is that the way your life was?
No. And I'll tell you where that starts. If you had asked that same question, who's heard of Warren Buffett, 30 years ago, nobody would have raised their hand, or maybe 2 people would have raised their hand. And certainly 40 years ago when I was a kid. That's the key, ultimately, I think. And, of course, the intention behind what he was doing, which is, that's a life lesson right there. I mean, intention is everything. And my dad was not going to work to make a lot of money. He was not going to work to make a lot of money to buy a bunch of things to prove that he was something. He was going to work to do what he loved, and he still does at 84. And the money was a scorecard. The money just told him that he was good at it, and it's as if I had a hit record that would tell me that I was good at a particular kind of music or something. So my dad first works at home when I'm young, and by about the age of 5, my age of 5, although he was probably going to the office at the age of 5 too, he went to the office that he still goes to, still drives himself, still parks in the same parking spot, still lives in the house I grew up in. And does it because he loves it, and that is. And by the way, he's 84, and he says he tap dances to work, but that's almost true because he loves it. Again, he's healthy, he's vibrant, he's all these things because he's happy. And so what I saw coming home every day at the exact same time, always at the dinner table, So again, this consistency of character was somebody that came home and said, what's new? What's happening? Because he didn't come home wishing he had another job, angry at the boss, all these things. And it was an extraordinary life. It was a privileged life because of that. That was the privilege, really. And
so the privilege for you was not great wealth. The privilege was learning early in life that if you choose a path of passion
Right.
and joy and loving what you do,
Right.
all the other things follow. What a
And
great
he
thing to
told me that.
demonstrate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one thing for a father or a mother, and they both did, say that to you as a child, which is wonderful, but to feel it. I think we really downplay the importance and level of impact, vibration, for lack of a better word. The feeling in the house actually is what you absorb. You know, all the words are ultimately just words because it's the feeling behind them. Someone can tell you, "Oh, I love you," but you're picking up on what they're feeling, really, especially when you're a young child. And so to feel that sense that my father was joyful and happy, and that my mother was a nurturing, loving mother, you can't go beyond that.
So, how many kids are there in your family?
3.
And you are, and where are you in the birth order?
I'm the youngest.
You're the baby.
I have an older brother and an eldest sister. All hail the baby. I'm quite happy to have been the last.
It is really a lot of joy
Yeah.
in being the baby in the family. So who's now at home? Because you're from Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha, yep.
And who's there now? Who lives there?
Well, like I said, my dad still lives in the house that I grew up in. And just as a little addendum, my mother grew up 2 blocks away from us, so I would walk to my grandparents, always an open door at my grandparents, 2 blocks away. So it was as close to sort of a tribal, the old-time way we all grew up, as it could be, pretty much. I walked to public school, went to public school my entire schooling period. I had the same English teacher my mother had, so serious roots. Now my sister lives in Omaha as well, walking distance from where my dad lives, where we grew up. She is sort of chief of protocol in Omaha now that my dad has achieved this status. She's, and I mean this in a funny way, but she's a little bit embarrassed about my dad's she's not embarrassed about it, but people come to Omaha expecting my dad essentially to live in the house that my sister lives in for him, right? So my sister can have someone of importance there, spend the night, all these things, because my dad's place is a little funkier, and he likes it that way.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
we would never want him to change it, but it's sort of like my sister is a wonderful addition and helpful component of my dad's life.
Well, Paul
for sure.
McCartney was out there having.
was.
So did he
Yep.
stay at your sister's house?
I don't think he did, but that's not. I mean, you know, Desmond Tutu has stayed at my sister's house. President Clinton has stayed. You know, these people actually, yeah, they stay there. And
Wow.
actually, she has a room that is essentially made up of elements of the Plaza Hotel, all from eBay. You know, she got all this stuff, and so it's very funny because you're in a room
You
in
can
Omaha.
buy any. I'm telling you,
Right,
I bought
exactly.
a house online. You
Right,
know, anybody
exactly.
can do it. Yeah, that's amazing. Now, I had
Yeah.
no idea. That's a surprise.
Yeah.
Now, where's your brother?
My brother is mostly in Decatur, Illinois, and he farms, although the philanthropy really takes away from his farming duties more and more. But he's a farmer in Decatur and an amazing photographer, actually. He's done that later. I say later in his life. He got into it in his 30s or so, but it was not something he was into as a kid, but has become an extraordinary photographer. As well as philanthropist. So he's busy doing that. And he's in Decatur. He also used to go to South Africa quite a bit. Now he works in Arizona. He has a farm there to understand the migrant farm worker issues and things like that. So he learns by doing really well.
It doesn't sound like any of your children followed your father's path of being, you know, I mean, I'm sure you invest in things like that, but not being
No,
what
we
your
don't.
father did. So what do you think it was that helped each of you go off on your separate ways without feeling that you were forced to follow an expected role?
Right. Well, that gets into how you define doing what my father does, because we actually do what my father does because he does what he loves, right? So if you back it up and say, okay, it's not investments, but it's actually fundamentally, again, the intentionality behind it is the same. And that's what we were, again, shown and told as kids is follow what you love. Don't do something for me, do something for you, you know, and that will do something for me, you know, if you really follow that path. And so, and it took me a while to really figure that out. I loved music my whole life, I always played piano, and I went off to college And still took everything that ended in 101 or ology. You know, it's like, what is the thing that I'm supposed to be passionate about? And it's hard to find sometimes, and it can take years. But after about a year and a half, I realized, wait a minute, it's music. It's always been music. There were things that helped tell me that, you know, but basically it kind of hit me over the head one day. And I thought, this is what my parents have been talking about, and I'm going to take the leap and do that.
So you're in college and you decide that music, and I think that was a really great point, that finding what we're really passionate about can be really hard. It's like you know it, but you're not sure. It's like your brother discovering photography. It was there. Farming, it was there. But it's like, and sometimes we look at it and we know it's there, but we go, well, that's not really a career. That's not right. Yeah, I can't be an artist. I can't be these things because, you know, that's arts and crafts. And
how am I going to make a living? And there's some, you know, there's some
and it's a question you need to ask. How do you then turn that on to become something that you love to do, that's purposeful for you, that makes a difference,
and still pays the rent, and puts food on the table.
Right. So I think that that's really, really an important question. So I know that you were in college and you came to your parents. So was it like, my parents were like, you're going to go to college, you're going to go to college, you're going to go to college. You know, it's like, you know, what are you going to do? You're going to go to college, you know? So,
yeah, exactly.
So when you were in college and you said you want to make a leap, how does that conversation go with your family?
Well, I can almost sort of remember it, but I can certainly tell you the essence of it. And I also want to address this thing about how you find your passion, because I connect it to a recording term, which is a signal to noise ratio, where in recording you want to get the best signal and the lowest noise. That's always the challenge in recording, especially when you're outside doing something. Like, how do I get the noise? And in life, you know, the noise is really everything. Your parents saying you got to go to college, billboards that you see every day, your friends telling you things. You know, I mean, there is so much noise now more than ever, of course, coming at you, that to find the signal, to find what your heart says and what speaks to you and your gut is telling you, is incredibly difficult. You know, kids are born with that. They know exactly what they need and then figure out how to get it. But as we get older, we just get bombarded with noise from the outside world. And so to break through that can sometimes be a lifelong process.
You know, it's really interesting. And it wasn't like in the last 2 years I kind of discovered, you know, because you go through shifts in your life, and I realized that there's something that happens physically to us when we are really doing the thing that ignites our passion. And it's this alignment that starts in your head. It's probably when you play music, you feel it from here. It goes down to your heart and then into your gut. And when you feel this emotional, it's like this almost sense of passion, joy, love. If you feel that with anything you're doing and that ignites in you, that may be the sign that that's what your gift and you were born to do.
And recognizing it and cultivating that and really tuning into it is,
That's probably like your brother in photography. I mean, it's probably what happens for him, because this is what I really love to do. So you're in college.
Exactly.
And you
so we'll go back to that.
So you go back and you say, Mom and Dad, I've got a great idea. I want to drop out. How did that go?
Well, surprisingly well. And there are there's multiple of caveats here. One is, my parents were paying for college, which is a huge, huge thing. And I didn't realize how big that was. And in fact, it wasn't as big then as it is now in terms of the cost of college, but it was still a big deal. And, you know, I think Stanford at that time was $7,000 a year or something, you know, just to kind of put things in perspective. And so I knew I could go back, and that's been, to some extent, the story of my life. I make leaps when I know I'm already kind of comfortable on a little lily pad, and you know, I can always go back if it doesn't work. But of course, if you take a leap, you don't want to fail. You want it to work. So it's not so much, you know, oh, I can always go back on this, as you know, this is safe and it's there just in case. But so that was a good thing. And the other thing was, and this is in the book, that my grandfather, when he passed away when I was very young, he left us all a farm, all the grandchildren, a farm. There were 9 of us. And my dad sold that farm and invested in Berkshire Hathaway stock, which of course he is famous for now. And so I had these 600 shares of Berkshire Hathaway stock, and that was about $90,000 when I was 19, when I made this decision, not quite 20. And so I also knew I had a little bit to work with, but again, I didn't want to mess up. And So I talked to my dad about doing it, and they were supportive. They said, go for it. You know, you've got this little bit of money. We know you've always been into music. I think if I had gone off in some strange place, they would have said, well, you might want to think about that. But they really supported it. And he even helped me say, you know, if you just spend this much and you're careful, you know, it'll last for a while. And of course, nobody knew what the trajectory of the stock would be, but just kind of an.
So what do you think that might be worth today?
Well, I was going to get to that. That would be.
I was just curious.
Right. So I'm going to balance out the idea that I had $90,000 and I invested in what I think is the most important, and my dad would agree, the most important investment you can make, which is yourself. And time, which is irreplaceable. You know, you can come up with almost everything else, but you can't make more time. It's what you got. And so I invested in those things and did it carefully. I didn't go out and buy, you know, I had a Volkswagen Rabbit and I had a little apartment in San Francisco and, you know, all these things. I was very lean, but not afraid to kind of dive in. And that resulted in the life that all these things that Elizabeth and the book talks about. And if I had done nothing, if I just sat on my hands from the age of 19, I would have over $120 million today from that $90,000. And I wouldn't have a story to tell, you know.
You had a book you had to write.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe I would, but I would not. The fundamental thing there is that I wouldn't know whether I could ever do anything because I wouldn't have done it. You know, the idea, and that's where kids that where their parents rush in and write a check and help them out. Now, sometimes that's important and useful, and it is showing love and nurturing. But most of the time, it's saying, I'm not sure if you can do it, so I'm going to help you do it. And the kid then slowly grows up going, gee, I wonder if I could have done that myself. I wonder if I'm capable. And it just eats away at self-worth. And at the end of the day, self-worth is all you got. And so to have that taken away by a good, loving parent potentially, but putting that love also in the wrong places in terms of not allowing the child to fall down and figure out, hey, I can get myself up. That's amazing. And that's what I did multiple times. I mean, I had a house with multiple mortgages. I did stupid things. And my dad cared. He would call and say, hey, how's it going? You know, he cared, but he said, you can do this. And I did. And that's irreplaceable.
Yeah, it's really hard to be a parent and not want to always scoop them up and shelter them.
Right.
But sometimes those lessons are their gifts.
Right.
And you have to let them have those opportunities to fail and recover and fail again.
Yep.
It's unfortunate, but I think that's part of the gift of life is the failures and then the recovery from that.
Yep.
So you left college. So where did you go and what did you do? You packed up your VW Rabbit, which I had when I went to Colorado for my first year of college.
Excellent.
I went
What
VW
color
Rabbit.
was it?
Huh?
What color was it?
Blue, pale blue, kind of gray blue.
Mine was kind of an orangey color.
Oh
so,
yeah, you were rocking it. You were rocking it. Yeah.
So I went up to San Francisco and got a little apartment, put an ad in the San Francisco Chronicle classified ads, when classified ads existed, and bought a little bit of equipment. I was lucky that a friend of my mother's, actually from Omaha, had moved to San Francisco and started a sound company and a recording company. So I had sort of an in terms of understanding how this all worked. I had this innate interest and aptitude for it, but I didn't really, I didn't go to school for it. So it's kind of like if you want to be a chef, you got to get in the kitchen at some point. Well, to record and make music, you just got to do it. And so I put an ad in saying something like, studio time, $35 an hour. I was one of the very few people, certainly one of the first, to have a studio in their apartment. This was considered radical at the time because studios were big places you went with all this equipment and all this stuff. But I just happened to catch technology in its infancy in terms of being able to afford to have a studio in your home. And this is really rudimentary stuff, but at the same time breakthrough technology. And so I recorded people, and then when no one was there, I recorded myself. And
so, were your neighbors mad?
Luckily, no. I had a great landlord that completely understood, and I think all my neighbors went to work when I did most of my recording, which was perfect because it was mostly during the day, actually. And then at night, I could be in headphones and play around and learn, also by doing, And then I was fortunate that a few years in, and I'd write music for student films, and basically said yes to everything. And so I learned a lot through that. But then I was in a new apartment, and a neighbor asked me what I did. He was an older guy, and I said, I write music. And he said, well, my son-in-law creates these crazy little animated things all the time, and they always need music. You guys should meet. And this was 1981. And I met him, and he said, sure enough, we're doing these things for this cable channel, and it's a music channel. And cable was basically unknown at that point. And it didn't matter because I was getting paid $1,000 to write 10 seconds of music, and that was pretty great. And I did a few of them, and I thought, I can get into this. This is great. And they were really crazy things, and it ended up that I was writing music for MTV. And so I was sort of hip by accident.
I mean, you just think about opportunity.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
there's a Confucius saying, luck is the wisdom to take advantage of an opportunity when it presents itself. You were at the right place at the right time. You said yes.
Yep.
Yes
and
to
I was
meaning.
prepared. Absolutely. Yep. And I was prepared, which is the key other piece of that, is that I said yes, and that really broke everything wide open because, again, unbeknownst to all of us doing it at the time, it became huge, and everybody wanted to look and sound like MTV. So I was immediately hired by all these ad agencies, and my commercial career took off. But I think the critical piece of that is you don't know the outcome. You just do your best like it's the only thing there is. and then the outcome is whatever it might be. And in this case, it was a huge catapult.
That's just amazing. You kind of always wonder who those crazy people at MTV. I remember MTV. Right. I mean, it was like so avant-garde. It was the new thing. It was the imagination exploding of possibility and expression. So to be there at that time must have been amazing.
It was incredible, and it did. And I hadn't really thought of it until you explained it that way. That it gave you hope for that possibility in terms of just creativity, just explosive. Anything goes. Anything's possible. And so, kind of unconsciously, that happened to me. When I was in that experience, I went, "Wow, you can really have fun here and try things and experiment." And yeah, it was great.
And that's always creating new thinking muscles. I always think about what's happening there for what you do with your music and how you then. So what does that lead to next in your life?
Well, that leads to doing a lot of commercials in San Francisco for a decade, and about halfway or so through that decade, commercials, great way to make a living, but felt sort of hollow, right? And I'm thinking, okay, I love that the music is a part of something, that it's helping do something else besides just be a piece of music. For whatever reason, I was attracted to that.
Any commercials we're familiar with, we might know?
Well, it's funny because most of the commercials were really, almost all of them were regional, but it was California, so they were large. I was also very lucky that I was not in New York or Chicago in particular, which are really the commercial capitals of the world. So I was sort of a big fish in a small pond. So I got to do California Milk Advisory Board and all these, and the grapes commercial and some Levi stuff. So I was able to do these big things, but not competing in the same way. And so I worked, McCann Erickson, J. Walter Thompson, all these big agencies, but their San Francisco office. So it was sort of perfectly scaled for personally my capabilities, because I did come from a do-it-yourself background. But at the time, again, when nobody was doing their thing in their basement with all this digital technology, that was so new and cutting edge that I was the kid doing that. There were still all these big studios that had the big, orchestras and all these things going on with commercials. And again, I was fortunate that those budgets didn't change, but it was just me, right? So I ended up making a lot more money than somebody that had to also pay all the musicians and do all this stuff.
Did you read the book, The Outliers? When they talk about outliers, you think about some of the most cutting-edge advances ever made have been the people who had access to cutting-edge new technology to play with it in a new and different way.
Right.
And you were kind of positioned in that way. I mean, that just occurred to me, those
Right.
people who were having the opportunity when computers were invented.
Right.
And just like when
Right.
sound equipment and having
Right.
it in your house. Who did
Exactly.
that? I mean,
Exactly.
so you have this opportunity to begin expressing in a whole new way. So
Yeah.
you now have positioned yourself,
Right,
especially
yeah.
when you're in a smaller place, because you can be discovered. If
Right.
you're
Yeah.
with a million
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. It gets. Yeah. About 4 or 5 years into this, I realized, oh, wow, I'm an expert just by dumb luck. You know, I just happened to catch it at the right time, and so yeah.
That's why I
it
say
just
I'm an
kinda
expert by
happened.
being a dumb blonde. You know.
Right. See, whatever way.
Yeah, whatever makes it work.
So there I am, sort of going, okay, this is great, but it doesn't. There's got to be something a little bit more. And I had watched other people, one person in particular, a guy named Mark Isham, get a film career started by putting out records. Because what happens is a film editor, while they're cutting together the final product, they haven't hired the composer yet. The composer almost always comes in last. But they need music to set the tone. And so the editor will pull things off the shelf to just put music underneath to show the director the cut. And so by putting out a record, this guy was used as temp music, is what they call it, and the director heard it and said, who is that? Because that is who should score the film. So I saw that as this really interesting way to get into film. So I thought, I got to get a record deal. And it turns out that New Age music was becoming very popular in the mid-'80s. And that's sort of what I was doing with the commercials. And so I put together, again, in the times I wasn't writing for other people, my own demo, and was lucky enough to get a record deal and put out an album that actually did very well for the genre, but that actually wasn't my point. I thought, well, that's great that this record is sold, and I'm very happy about that. It makes me feel good, but I want to get into movies. And so before my second record came out, I was with my uncle, who was reading a book called Son of the Morning Star, which was about Custer and the westward expansion and the battles in the 19th century and all this history that I'd never learned. And that's what I was most stunned by, the history I'd never learned. You know, why wasn't this in school? What's this country really all about? How did we do this? I think there's some stories that need to be told. I was very moved by that and wrote my second record sort of based on the feelings of that. It didn't sound Native American, it wasn't, but it was emotionally charged with the feelings from that book. And after the record came out, I was watching Entertainment Tonight, which I admit to, and and they were doing a little piece on this movie that Kevin Costner was making called Dances with Wolves. And I went, oh my God, here's my chance, here's my other opportunity, right? This is the lucky part. And I thought, and I'm so glad none of you are coming to my performance tonight because I'm giving away the whole thing. But it's I'm doing this because you won't see it.
No, you want to see it. Trust me, it is so
At some point,
moving.
I'll be in a theater where you can, hopefully. And sometimes I played special events, and this is one of those. But so I thought, how am I going to get my music to Kevin Costner? Because you got to remember, again, the Buffett name was all about Jimmy Buffett at that point. You know,
Yeah.
people assume.
Which everybody said, I'm going to go see.
Right, right,
I'm going to be
exactly.
interviewing Peter Buffett. They said, tell him I lived in South
Right,
Beach.
Florida.
I
Or
go,
somewhere, yeah, right. Yeah.
The wrong
Not that
one.
wrong Buffett. And I got that constantly. Are you related to Jimmy Buffett? Which I'm not. And and that's the beauty of it. I was in a field where my dad's influence, even if it was big, couldn't help, because music is music. You either like it or you don't. And so I thought, how am I going to get my music to Kevin? And I remembered that I'd gone to college with a guy who married a woman whose father was Costner's agent's best friend. And that's how my little cassette tape got to Kevin one day.
Isn't that amazing? Now say that again. It's really amazing.
I'll try. That's a neural pathway that has actually been, there's a groove there now. I went to school with a guy who married a woman whose father was Costner's agent's best friend. Right.
And I'm going to get him my tape.
Right, yeah, exactly. And I'm going to, and so sure enough, Kevin called me up after hearing the music and said, I want you to score Dances with Wolves. Now, this is where preparedness did not meet the opportunity because I'd never scored a film before. But Kevin absolutely believed in me. I did demos for him. We talked back and forth. And again, this is the example, too, that nobody knew Dances with Wolves was going to be big. They thought Kevin was crazy. And everybody in Hollywood thought Kevin was crazy, except the people backing him. And even they weren't so sure. And so the outcome was that they ultimately said to Kevin, you are not going to have some guy who's never scored a film score this film. There's too much on the line. And so I didn't get it. And again, I didn't know how big it was going to be. So while I was disappointed, I wasn't as disappointed as I would have been if I had known. And maybe I would have worked harder if I had known. But I knew I knew it was too big for me, essentially. And so I said, okay, you know, I tried. And again, I'd done these demos with an orchestra and stuff. But I understood it, certainly. And a couple months later, he called me up and said, "Are you busy?" The answer always is no, of course. And he said, "There's a scene I want you to score." And he sent me just a little piece of the film because they didn't want it all out in the world. And it had a little bit of the film and then, of course, my scene there to score. And I did that. And his wife then at the time said, "Would you come out and play at the premiere?" They really loved this record of mine. I mean, it was really, as Kevin told me later, very instrumental in his writing and rewriting of the film. I mean, somebody else wrote the fundamental story, but he was writing helping write the script. And so it was wonderful to hear. And so I went out and I played at the premiere of Dances with Wolves. It was my second live gig ever. That's saying yes, right? Now it's not, because it's a big party, of course, nobody's totally focused on you, and that helps. But it was I put together a group and figured it all out and played. But because of that, I hadn't actually seen the film. I'd never seen the finished film because I was busy at the premiere. I was rehearsing and sound checking all that, so I didn't see it. So it took it, and I did, though, run out the next morning to get the LA Times, because that's where the premiere was, and read the review. And it was this amazing review. And in the review, it said the pivotal scene is the fire dance scene. It called me out.
I mean, and
oh my God.
I want you to stop and think about this. This was saying yes without knowing what you can really do, losing an opportunity, presenting itself again, and the most important scene is something that if anybody's seen the movie, you feel it to this day. To this day, you in your mind can see that scene, which was a game changer, I think, for many people, because we had a new insight into what it was to be Indian and the changing world. When I think about that, it's just always so astonishing to me. And it's simply saying yes to opportunity, being present, taking a leap of faith, and doing it. A lost opportunity created the opportunity of a lifetime, which you earned your first Emmy.
Well, actually, that won multiple Academy Awards, including Best Music. I unfortunately did not get a little chip off the statue for my part. It's so funny. My mother gave me a little Oscar with it on the, which I have, of course. And they
your
weren't
parents
sure.
could afford a bigger Oscar.
Probably, yeah, exactly.
I'm just saying.
But it was fine because they tried to get me one, but there's a certain technicality in terms of amount of music in it. The scene is about 2 minutes long, but it is the transcendent scene. I mean, that's what's amazing, is that what it represented in the film and what it represented in my life was one and the same. And that, I didn't know that at the time, but I look back on that and go, oh my God, I was scoring my own experience, actually, which is probably, again, unbeknownst to me, why I captured it the way I did and why it worked.
I think that you have just, articulated that so well, because throughout your life, and you think about wealth and money, you think about a very different kind of life versus one that your family really shows us, which is spirituality, which I think is really fascinating, and how that's played a part in your life. So what follows after this crazy, absolutely amazing success?
Well, actually, at that point, I have just moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin from San Francisco, and it was not because of the witness protection program. Most people figure, because who would do that? But I wanted to, for a variety of reasons. The record label was based there. I grew up in the Midwest. All sorts of reasons kind of pulled me towards wanting to be there. My business was thriving, and I realized I could do it anywhere. And it was an interesting time for all those things to be happening. This is 1989, actually, when I moved. And so the biggest agent in Hollywood at the time, a guy named Mike Ovitz, took me in his office and said, "You got to move to LA, and I'll help you. I'll introduce you to all the people, and I'll take you down the track of budding film composer." And I went back to Milwaukee, and for about a week or so, I went, oh my God, I'm moving to LA, I have to do it, and this is what an opportunity, blah, blah, blah. And then it wore off, and I realized, wait a minute, I think I just found who I am going to be, or who I am in a way, musically and in some kind of essence. And And much like my father, staying in Omaha instead of going to New York and being distracted by all the noise of all these people saying, this is what you should do, this is what you should be, this is how to live. I thought, I can't go to LA because I'm going to get sucked into an ocean of people just like me, and I'm going to, I'm going to get lost. And so I didn't. And I stayed in Milwaukee, ended up scoring a 8-hour series for Kevin called 500 Nations, which was the really definitive, certainly the first definitive history of the North American Indian nations. It was a huge show, first on CBS, which was also pretty groundbreaking, that this documentary was on CBS. And then that just kept leading to more and more things, including a stage production that I created called Spirit the Seventh Fire, which was on the Mall here during the opening of the National Museum of the American Indian. And I just got deeper and deeper into the indigenous story through knowing people, feeling things, having experiences, and realizing the extraordinary importance of reconnecting all of us to our tribal nature, in a sense. I mean, for 199,900 and whatever years, we lived that way. If you could go back 200,000 years and essentially recognize yourself. You go back too much further, and there's a difference between us and the people walking around that became us, right? But for about 200,000 years, we've been us, and we have been living in a communal, mutual respective, connected to the earth. There's a whole world that's in our DNA. That's actually who we are, and so over the past 10,000 years, 500 years, specifically 150 years, we've just been compressed into this version of what we think we are, but we're not at all. I mean, and that's why people are so feeling disconnected and fighting and all these things, is because we aren't ourselves, actually. And, plants have been around for 300 million years. Animals have been around for 150 million years. We just haven't been around long enough. We are literally infants compared to the rest of the natural world. And I don't think we have that perspective clearly enough to realize, well, of course things feel out of whack. They are out of whack. We're out of whack with ourselves and our nature. And
I think it's because we're always trying to fit into the mold of others. What we think other people think think they should think. We're putting even their perspective of our perceptions on them.
Right.
And I think it's when you stand where you should be, when you step out. I think that was really an important message. You went to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I gotta agree, that's a little weird, but spiritual places in the earth. Milwaukee.
Right.
No.
Exactly. Not maybe first on the list.
Beer.
Right. Yeah.
Great
right.
beer.
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Spiritual, not so much. Well, if you drink a lot of beer, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
But
I was going to say that.
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting. So how long did you stay in Milwaukee, and what was next?
Well, I was there for 15 years, and within 2 years, I met my now wife of 23 years. I mean, we didn't get married the day we married the day we met, but 5 years later. But we've been together 23 years, and that's where I met her. So maybe that's the reason I moved to Milwaukee. I'll call it that for sure. We lived there for 15 years, and then moved to New York in 2005, that had its purpose and was important to be in the city and experience that. And now, like Elizabeth said, we moved upstate and live on a farm now, and that's spiritual.
The farm. So you felt that when you stood there, you knew that's where you're supposed to be?
Yeah.
Have you ever had that experience wherever you moved to or something happened and you stood there and you go, I'm supposed to be here?
Right.
And you know how long that journey is, but you're just supposed to be here.
Yeah.
So what are you doing on a farm? So you're a musician, an author, a farmer.
Well, I'm not. I'm not a farmer. What living on a farm has taught me is how hard farmers work. Oh my God, that is a big job. And by the way, 200 years ago, we were all farmers. That's the other thing we forget. And that everybody knew what everybody else did. Everybody knew the story and the struggle and the complexity. And I'm talking about men and women, of course, because everybody had a purpose. And I will say that the Industrial Revolution, essentially when machines started doing what men specifically, and then women, used to do, we didn't have anything to do. We lost our purpose. And so what do? You make stuff up. You figure, well, we got to have a purpose. let's create an economic system. Let's create all these things that give us purpose. But that's why they feel so shallow. That's why we're in the mess we're in, because it's not normal. We're making stuff up because we don't have anything to do, essentially. That's my feeling, and I feel it very deeply, and I feel it from being on a farm, remembering what life is and what it used to be, and I think we'll end up once we get through this kind of delusional state that we're in.
The state of things.
The
state of,
exactly.
of being and connecting. So what are you trying to accomplish here at your farm? What are you going to do with your farm?
Well, we are recognizing this gets in the philanthropic work. So I'm just moving along in my life, and things are good, and things are sometimes amazing, and all that. And then my dad in 2006 decides to give all his money away.
So that must have made all the kids happy.
Yeah, right? Exactly. That's another thing. Yeah, people definitely think, wow, how'd you feel about that? We always knew it. And I don't know how we always knew it, frankly. I don't remember ever sitting down and my dad saying, now you're not going to get anything, kids. But it just was a sense that, why should we? That's his thing. That's his success. I want my own. And it just seemed normal. But in fact, we didn't know that we'd play a role in it. We just figured that day would come sometime and whatever. And in 2006, he made this decision and, of course, gave the bulk of it to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But my brother and sister and I all separately were giving this very large foundation, $1 billion, which has now increased to almost, over 3, I think. And, it's really funny when you get a $1 billion foundation. You're better looking, your jokes are funnier, you're like, get invited to all this stuff. People love you, all of it. And so there was that. There was kind of getting used to, wow, this just distorted everything.
You're in charge, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you.
Absolutely, yeah.
How did you, was it a short straw, or how did that happen, that you got to be in charge?
Well, all 3 of us are in charge. So my parents very wisely said, you've got one, and you've got one.
So you each have a foundation that you run.
Yes, exactly. And we end up working together in ways, or certainly sharing information and all that, because we're not fighting over, my thing's more important than your thing, or that kind of stuff. All that's gone. So we've been able to work really easily and smoothly through our individual work. And I co-everything with my wife Jennifer, so co-president, co-chair, all this stuff. And because we really learned together, built this thing together. And one of the things, and I know we'll get to some of the others, but one of them is realizing that we are kind of forming ourselves societally in unnatural ways. I mean, the centralization of everything, the way things move around, whether it's about fossil fuel or it's about just, organizing principles of people, things are out of whack. And that, so we support things that we put under the umbrella of local living economies. How do you make communities resilient? And of course, 2008 helped us. When things fell apart, people said, oh my God, part of this happened because I don't see my banker in the grocery store. I mean, it sounds simple, but if you had a relation, if you could look somebody in the eye and say, this is my situation and this is yours, and do you understand me and do you see me, people would behave differently. And so when you remove humanness from the equation, you get subhuman activity. You get people that don't really care.
That's a really good point. It really is, if you think about it. We used to always know our banker,
absolutely,
and our teachers, and all
where our
people
food came from,
right.
And all these things. Where our grandparents didn't call it organic; they just call it food. It's just, and so these things are very recent developments, and so to try and support things, and this gets back to what we're doing with our farm. We're learning from our own farm. It's very small. It's like 6 acres, but it's amazing how much comes off of 6 acres. I mean, you can feed a lot of families, which our farmer, Jacob does. Young guy, thank God. He's got way more energy than I ever could have at my age. But he's shown us literally not only what it can mean, to support through a small amount of land, but what it feels like to eat the food from the land you live on. I think that has fundamentally changed me in ways I can't possibly quantify, but I know it's true. And then from that learning, we are now supporting a much larger farm nearby, actually, in the Hudson Valley, to show how communities can knit themselves together around agriculture. So getting into schools, getting into food pantries, and all sorts of different things, so people understand where their food comes from.
This is really important work. Now, your brother is also, I understand, very much into farming.
Right.
And that's one of the things he's doing. Is that part of what he focuses on in his
It's
foundation?
a little different. He's really interested in sort of the technology of farming, and I mean that in the best way possible, in terms of how can people in other countries not just get subsumed by somebody else's version, like the Green Revolution or something, but how can we make sure that small farmers have a voice, have a chance, have opportunities, that sort of thing. So he's a little more international with it, and also doing different aspects of it. But yeah, we share.
But then you
common
can
values.
share that
Yeah.
knowledge and,
Yeah.
and bring that back. And what about your sister? What's her focus?
Well, she's in Omaha, and her focus is pretty much Omaha. A lot of it is early childhood education, which actually goes beyond Omaha, the importance of that, and foster kids, supporting lots of different things in Omaha, a lot of it around education. And she's sort of, not even sort of, she really has taken my mother's, who died in 2004, my mother's intention and kind of what she brought into the world in Omaha, keeping it in Omaha. It's wonderful.
So what does your dad express to you about the work he wants to see you continue his legacy? Because he's deliberately said, okay, the money's not a gift to you, but it is a gift in a way.
Yeah,
And
right.
he really trusts,
Absolutely.
it's a huge statement, I trust my
Yep.
children greatly.
Yes, exactly.
So what do you think he's saying to you, or what has he shared with you?
Well, actually, that's exactly what he's saying to us. I trust my children greatly. And he basically doesn't say anything else in the best way possible. So he is not, the overlord of like, okay, now that you've got my money, I can start to control you through, people find that really hard to believe that. But if you look at his business practice, it makes perfect sense. I mean, he owns all these businesses, and if he doesn't talk to a manager of one of those businesses in a year, he's fine with that. Because as long as the business is doing what he bought it for, essentially, which is usually to do exactly what it's been doing for probably generations, he has no reason to put his fingers in there and meddle. And so as he's seen us, all of us, work in philanthropy, he's in fact given us more, because he's saying through that gesture, I see what you're doing, I believe in you, just keep going. And he will call us occasionally, as he did with me about a month ago, and say, if I were your age, I'd be doing the same thing. In terms of the kinds of things I'm doing with the philanthropy, he sees it, he gets it, he's supportive, but I'd be very surprised if I ever got a call from him saying, you should do this or you shouldn't do that or that. It would never happen.
So having that trust.
Yeah.
So I know we're very compressed on time, and everybody wants you to know you get a book. So,
Yes.
and he's going to sign it.
And now it'll be boring because you've heard
No.
everything.
but I want to ask you, so I want to leave it and then have time for a couple questions. You've written this really book. What is it you want people to take away? What do you think is really the essence of what you want? And I realize probably when everybody reads it, we all hear something, we're ready to hear it. But what is it you think is really fundamental that you wanted to share?
Well, what you just said, here's something when we're ready to hear it, is essentially it. It's that everybody has a story, and it's valuable and important and needs to be told and lived out. I realized just a couple years ago that I didn't have anything to live up to. What I had is something to live into, right? So I wasn't struck by, oh my God, I have to be this, I have to be that, I should do this, I should do that. It's like, who am I and what am I living into that is uniquely mine? What's my story? And the book, when people, sometimes when I talk about the book and I'm in a situation like this, people say, especially in China, what should I do? What should I do? And it's like, I'm not here to give you advice. This is my story. And the whole point is you've got one too. And so listen to that and yeah, just find it in yourself and live it out that in a way that is true for you, which can be hard.
It's really the essence is we all have our story, and I think we try to deliver a story to other people we think other people want.
Right.
And it's really
Exactly.
authentically finding your story,
Right.
living your story with
Right.
purpose.
Right. We talked about spirituality, and I'll go there for 1 minute, is I just believe we're all versions of God, and the only way we can actually bring that into life from a other, whatever the place is to live fully into ourselves, because then we're true to that particular nature of everything, just like, I don't know if this is a real plant, but yeah.
It is.
But just like this plant is, it's not trying to be anything else. That's the point about being around for hundreds of millions of years. You figure it out after a while. Give us another million years and maybe we'll get to it. But the natural world is incredibly instructive because it does things really well because it's had the time to say, this is what I am. I'm not trying, the tree outside my window is not trying to be a squirrel. It knows it's a tree, and it does it really well. And that may sound a little flippant or silly, but it's what we all need to be, is our version of our nature.
I think that's really true. Okay, we're going to have time for like 3 questions. So, okay, right back here.
Yes.
Hi. What you spoke about a few moments ago about the dehumanized transactions between the banker and
Right.
the person in the grocery store. What needs to happen in your estimation for that to change?
That's the question of the whatever moment or century or universe, because it's almost I think it's a consciousness shift. I think we're ready. I hope. I don't know whether, I always joke about, is it 1750? Is it 1720? Like, where are we before the revolution happens? And I mean revolution in the best sense of the word, just a turning of something into the next thing. And it takes a fundamental consciousness shift, which, we've looked to religion, we've looked to various spiritual practices. Those things can be helpful, but they're sort of codified, institutionalized versions of something that is about something much bigger. I don't know how we do it. I'm just trying to talk about it, and I think that, like at the foundation, we talk about creating conditions for change. We're not going to say this is how we want the world to be, this is what we want to have happen. All we can do is sort of create the conditions so that hopefully something positive and transformational can happen. And honestly, just by being in this room, if one of you gets affected in some way and it shifts something towards the direction of this consciousness shift so that we remember that it's all about relations and not transactions, we're getting there, And I don't know whether that happens overnight at some point and we'll go, oh my God, I get it. And we start hugging each other, or it takes another 5,000 years, which it might. But the whole be the change you want to see in the world is dead on. People think it's do the change you want to see in the world. We're human beings, not human doings. And so if you really absorb that and recognize that every act is a choice, and every time you go out in the world, if you do it out of love and compassion and gratitude, you're going to start seeing the world change. It happens. It's magical.
One thing
I recommend it.
we talked a lot about was you believe that really creating opportunities for girls is hugely important. You believe
Right.
that can create a huge shift.
Yes.
Why don't you share a little bit about your insight and what you've learned in your research about what happens with girls?
Here's what I've learned. I have learned that the most powerful thing on this planet is a girl that knows she's safe. And that the objectification, the sexualization, the oppression of girls and women is fundamentally because there is so much power there that it's scared guys to death for whatever reason. And I can go into the details of why I think that's happened, but essentially women hold something that nothing else on this planet holds. And as long as we're in this place of, again, objectification, sexualization, oppression, all these, it's holding that down, and that has got to be released. And I believe it's through, the younger the better for both boys and girls, but it's through girls recognizing that their voice is not only important, it's essential for our evolution. We're going to get somewhere. And so we do that in various ways with the foundation. But again, me saying it as a white male in particular may carry more weight than all the money in the world. I don't know, but I'm going to say it and see what happens.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, but I've never heard articulated so well as the most important thing in this world for girls is to feel safe.
Absolutely.
That is hugely powerful. And you think
That's the key to
about-
our future.
Yeah.
I know it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I've read a lot about what you see in there, and I think I've shared a lot what you see is that studies show that if boys are given opportunity, that financial reward that comes back to them only goes like 30 or 35% goes back in the community. When girls are given financial opportunities, it's like 90%. I think you would share that with me.
Sure, yeah, and nobody can argue with the fact that only the girl is going to be the mother of the child,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That, right? Everybody.
Yeah.
So therefore, you are making generational, transformational change just by giving her that safety and that voice and that power that she has. You know, sometimes we talk about that we empower girls. That implies they don't have it. They do have it. You know, we're just creating the conditions so they can feel their own power.
That's a good point. That's a really great question. I want to make sure we get that on tape, because how do you perceive, you know, we have the wealthy, and your family is the epitome of that conversation. The wealthiest of the wealthiest to the poorest of the poorest, and how do we begin to bridge that gap?
Right. And, you know, I have to believe, although it's very hard for me to say this, that it exists for a reason. Easy for us all to say, different for someone.
When you have a full belly and
right,
clothes.
Exactly. But you got to believe that it has to be shown for us to fix it or to transcend it. And, you know, I also, not really jokingly, say there's all this, people aghast at how many people live on less than $2 a day. The truth is we should all be living on $2 a day. You know, the money system and what it's created is, again, a complete distortion of who we are as human beings, and it's made us not human beings. You know, somebody said we're being governed by moral mutants. And there's some truth to that. It's a mutation. It's not normal. And it's not about a person. You know, I will not point fingers at any individual and say it's your fault, because it isn't. It's a construction that people are inside of that absolutely believe they're doing the right thing and certainly doing their best in it. And so it's going to take some kind of a consciousness shift. I hate to use that because it sounds so kind of new agey or whatever, but it's, you know, Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same consciousness that was created. And that's where we have to get to, where the people that have all this money realize it's built on fear and mistrust and all these false attributes, you know, that we've taken on, and it is in fact only energy. It has to move to do things, and if you're holding it, it means you're afraid. You just are. Otherwise, you'd be moving it in ways that would help your fellow man that you could see as a human being. And so, something's got to give, and I don't certainly know how it's going to happen, but it has to happen, and so therefore I have to believe that it exists only to make sure it does happen, because it's like a rubber band or something. We've gone so far in the wrong direction, and it is strange to be, you know, the subject of that very thing, except that is the best tool I have, is to be my father's son and say this is really screwed up and we got to fix it, and try and do the things I can. And again, the money is one thing, but talking about it is as, you know, living it is as important or more so.
How I would phrase that is, you're talking about the evolution of humanness.
Right.
And it's not that if you gave all the money away, it wouldn't change the issues that we have in the world today. If you went in today,
yeah,
although if
absolutely.
you do feel like writing a check today, I would help you. But it's to the point of what we do and how each of us human have a stake in that conversation and that change and the shift. And it's not the dollar, it's the hand.
Right.
It's the hand of opportunity.
Yep. And it's not blaming someone. It's very
not,
easy to say it's your fault that I'm in this position. And it's like, okay, you know, on certain levels, from the pure mechanic standpoint, that may be true, but it's way bigger than that. And people have to start, because I think people are afraid, for instance, in this country, to face our own history in terms of slavery and the American Indian, all these things, because then you'd have to go, oh my God, it's my fault. No, it's so much bigger. It's okay in terms of here we are now. Let's not start going into guilt and shame and fear and all these things. Let's just start treating each other differently, having learned that was not the way to treat people. And I hope that starts to happen.
Prejudice and bias slip away. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I've got one more over here, and then we'll go over here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lashina. Thank you so much for being here. This has been a wonderful experience. I just had a question. You said you believe we're all versions of God. I believe that as well. And I wanted to know, kind of two parts. Did you always know that, or was that an evolution?
Right.
And then the second part of that is, I work with some at-risk youth, and I find a lot of their struggle is trying to make that jump to some
Right.
some compliments. What would you say to somebody that works with youth or to the youth? What would you
Right.
say to the youth that are
Right.
trying to understand that?
Boy, okay, I'll take the first part first, which is it's both and. I knew it somehow, and I think we all do actually as children. You know, I knew it. My mother kept that alive, which was huge, you know, because a lot, for whatever reasons, a lot of parents get distracted and forget that they're God too, and that their children have this innate quality that should be nurtured. And so I was nurtured really well in that way. But then I also learned it. You still have to, you're still in this, you know, human suit, and you're walking around going, this doesn't seem to fit so well. And so there's a lot of figuring it out and then remembering, which is, again, what we all have to do in our way, is like remember ourselves. and so that's that. And then what to say, I mean, what to say to a 14-year-old who's, got a single mom, who's working 3 jobs, who's so insanely busy she can't be the nurturing parent she knows in her heart she wants to be and needs to be. And so the child is lost, just out at sea. And then because we have such a search for tribalism and community and connection, a gang or whatever is the perfect solution to that. It speaks to this fundamental DNA aspect that says, I need to belong, and I don't have the nurturing mother or aunt or whoever, and some do, it's the grandmother, it's the aunt, it's the coach, it's whoever can provide some little bit of light to show that person that that's what they are, that they have this inside of them. But it's so individual, it gets back to, I don't know how to be prescriptive in terms of what to say, because everybody's story is so unique, and that's ultimately what they need to know. And it's safety. I mean, one of the most powerful things we do at the foundation is to literally just provide safe spaces for girls in a little town in India or something. All they do is come together, and that's where providing safe spaces for these kids. The most powerful 2 words in the English language is me too. If somebody realizes they have a witness and they have someone saying me too, and there's suddenly this heart-to-heart feeling of, wow, I'm not alone, that's essentially the best thing you can do for them. What they do with that and how they play that out in their lives, who knows? But for them to recognize that they're not alone, that they have somebody that sees them and will sit with them and hear their story, it's the best thing you can do, I think.
I think that was so powerful, because you realize the role all of us can take in that child. It doesn't have to be your child. It could be
Right.
anybody's child. But to stop and listen, observe, and
Right.
hear, and say, me
Right.
too. I
Yeah.
love that. Me too.
Yeah.
One last question, Claudia. Last question.
I was wondering, Nicholas Kristof a few years ago wrote an article about how we give, how we donate.
Right.
And he said that unfortunately most of the American public gives less than what prescribed idea of their percentage of their earnings is.
Right.
And I'm not going to ask why, but how, the question is, how do we get more people? And we are a country of vast wealth.
Right.
How do we get more people to give more?
Well, I again, it always gets back to understanding our common humanity and recognizing that you are me and I'm in you, and we are actually connected. But we're in this crazy structure. I mean, America was founded as a commercial enterprise. You reap what you sow. We're in this world where we think we're supposed to hoard, and that our self-worth is our net worth, and what if something happens? We've got all this fear going out there in terms of the news and what you have to be careful of, and you better make sure you've got yours. And so there's this whole narrative running that has created this problem. And how do you change the narrative? I mean, it's all just a story, don't forget. I mean, it's only Wednesday because we all agree it's Wednesday. It's actually just a day. And the sun came up and the sun's going to go down. It's only $1 because we agree it's $1. So fundamentally, we have to change the stories we believe in, and that's a big one. And it's, again, it rests in fear, and and again, what the country was founded on, instead of learning and growing together with the people that were here. Imagine the difference. If there's a single screw up in our evolutionary process, is that we came over here and thought we knew more than the indigenous people did. I mean, that was crazy. And we're paying the price. And so, I don't know, it just gets back to, I hate to keep saying it, but this consciousness shift where people understand, wait a minute, we actually really are all in this together. I'm only as far along as you are. So, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Gandhi said, to the last man, last woman, however you want to say it, but we have to all lift each other up and recognize that it's only through that we all get lifted up, and that just because, somebody's got a pile of cash. And so, there in the William Blake poem about the auguries of innocence that gets quoted sometimes, there's a line in there, something like, the dog that's starving at the gate shows the future of the state, or something like that. So in other words, if you are letting members of your own community starve, that's going to tell you where you're headed, because you are not taking care of what needs to be taken care of. And that's where we are. And I think it's becoming so obvious that it might start to change people's hearts and minds, and we'll see. I mean, it's got to happen eventually. But
So I guess we're all part of the story, ultimately,
absolutely.
and the change we want to make. And I think we show the change.
Yep. Yeah.
And I can't thank you enough for your generosity of time and spirit and sharing and enlightening us on philanthropy and growth and change and spirituality. I mean, these were massively important topics, and I think it's good we're talking. They seem simple, but they're not, and they're important. And I think you've kind of shown us we dispel some of the things that really are important to us.
Right.
And it's easy to do. We live in Washington, D.C.
Oh yeah,
It's not,
absolutely.
Hard earth is concrete. So
no, exactly.
So.
And the halls of power, I mean, they look that way so that the person graduating from Harvard can feel comfortable when they walk into Congress. The kid that grew up on the streets in the inner city goes in and goes, whoa, this place is made for somebody else, not for me. That's on purpose. And we have to break down the structures that are making the voices that need to be heard uncomfortable to speak.
So maybe we'll hold a congressional session out on your farm.
Perfect.
Could you see?
I'm in.
Both sides, yeah.
Right.
It'd
Exactly.
be interesting. I want to thank all of you for coming. I want you to get your book and have Peter sign it. We also have lunch out there. I should have told you that before, but I was so engaged in talking to you, I totally forgot. But there's food there, so help yourselves, eat some food, get your book signed. I can't thank you enough
Thank
for
you so
joining
much
us
for
today.
having me.
It's been
Thank you.
wonderful.
It was really great. Thank you all.